Big green button. Yes, it is. So, thank you everybody for coming to hear me talk a little bit about going into a resilient society. I am the Chief Security Officer of Telenor Group, which is a telecom company. We operate in the Nordics and we operate also in South and Southeast Asia. But I wasn't always in telecoms. I was doing the math the other day and I found out that I've been in security for more than 25 years now. Most of the time it was in information and cybersecurity, but it wasn't always. I started out in 1997. I was then trained to be a military police officer, and I did my duty for the Norwegian Navy. And as a military police officer, of course, you were doing access control. You were checking who is coming onto the base, who is leaving the base, do they have the right to be here, do they have the right credentials, and so on. And we would also go around the base to check that doors were locked, that windows were locked. And then there was one other thing that we did, and that was that every night we went into the offices of the higher ranking officers in the Navy to see if they had been so stupid as to forget sensitive documentation or documents on their desks. And very often they did, because they would be working on cases for multiple days, multiple weeks. This was in the 90s. A lot of information was analog then, still is in the armed forces, I would say. And going from day to day, they didn't want to lock everything up, so they just left it there on the desk, which of course was breach of protocol. So what we would do then, we would collect the documents, we would bring them back to the military police office, and they would have to come in and speak to our lieutenant the next day to get it back. And it was very interesting to see, because they always came like this into the office to get their documents, and then they returned like that when the lieutenant had told them off. But the reason for me telling this is, back in those days, dealing with security, it was all about confidentiality. Confidential information, information that was only privy to certain people with certain access levels, that was the only interesting thing. You know, we talk about the CIA triad of information security. We have confidentiality, we have integrity, we have availability. Confidentiality was always the poster boy, so to say, of information security. That was the important thing. And then coming into financial services, where I also spent a lot of time, I started to work as a junior analyst in the Security Operations Center. And the CISOs and CSOs and heads of security that I saw in every business that I met, they were either ex-military or they were ex-policemen. And I say men because all of them were men as well. So it was quite hopeless. And of course, they brought with them the same mentality into the offices as they used to have in the field. Confidentiality, red tape, keeping people away from the information, and the information that isn't worth protecting is not interesting. That was the mindset. But the world is changing. And I have a friend, a professional colleague. He works now for the National Security Agency in Norway. And of course, those are guys that deal with a lot of secret information, but he has this talk where he speaks about the importance of availability. And in one of his presentations, it's a joke, it's a bit of a dark joke, but he has a tombstone. And it's his name, his own name on the tombstone, and he's obviously dead, according to this photo. And then there is a small inscription at the bottom of the tombstone that says, "At least his data was kept confidential." And the reason for this story and this picture is that he has an example. He says, I'm out exercising, I have an accident, and I have a medical condition that prevents me from getting some sort of medication because I will have an allergic reaction to it. But imagine that I'm exercising and I have an accident. People call the ambulance, but the data is only available digital. They don't have them in a physical format, and the network is broken down and it can't access the data. And because everything is kept so confidential, there is no way to circumvent the controls, and the medical personnel, they just take the chance and they administer the medicine and he dies. But at least his data was kept confidential. So the question he raises is, how important is confidentiality? And that is a bit the point of my talk here today. Let's speak a little bit more about the medical area. 100 years ago, we had a pandemic. It was called the Spanish flu. I would be surprised if anybody in the room remember that one. But I know that every single one of you remember the last one, the COVID-19. At least I do still. It feels like it was years ago, but I still remember it quite well. But if we look at how the Spanish flu was managed, it took years to get out of that pandemic. And lots of people died as a percentage of the population. It was a huge number compared to the COVID-19. And it put a lot of pressure on anyone for several years. But then we fast forward to the COVID-19. See how quickly we were able to develop a vaccine, to produce the vaccine, to distribute worldwide a vaccine. And actually, the Middle East, the Emirates, one of the first locations where you could come and get vaccinated. It was record-breaking time. And this was thanks to availability of information, cross-border research, and collaboration. So what is more important? That everybody sits in their own country looking at the data, or that the data is available for a broader community so we can collaborate, we can research, we can innovate, and we can collectively get out of this mess that the pandemic was. Very important. Also, there were criminal elements trying to sabotage, naturally. We had a lot of issues with misinformation as well. Fake news, anti-vaccines, all those kind of things. And that is the second point. I mean, availability, obviously very important, but integrity as well. That we understand, that we know, that we can be certain that the information is correct. That is starting to become equally important. And as Chris was arguing here in the previous talk, how do we know if the information is correct? How do we know if the person we are speaking with or chatting with is indeed a person? Or at least the person that we think this person is. That is another thing that will become increasingly more important for us as information security professionals to ensure going forward. Yes, confidentiality is still important, I would argue, but availability, that the information is available for people to use it, and integrity, that it is correct, I think will trump that. Let's talk a little bit more about integrity. First, I would like to say that the world has never been better. And that is the truth. I know that many people today will absolutely not argue. We see the geopolitical tensions, they rise across the world. We see international conflict rise in many areas. But the truth is that never before has so many people had a roof over their heads, access to medical care, been able to read, to have water and food. Never before have so many people have rights and freedom. That is the truth if you look at the big picture. Of course, we have a lot of problems. but it is getting better. And a lot of thanks to that goes into the availability, research, innovation, and sharing of information. When we talk about the world today and the conflicts, I live in Europe, and you know that now we have a conflict in Europe again. I'm not going to discuss it specifically, but it is there, and it's quite close, so you get some different perspective on things outside of what you read in the news. And in Norway, where I'm from, we receive a number of refugees right now because people are moving around and trying to find a safe place. And I was hosting one of those refugees for 6 months' time last year. And it was a person in the early 20s, very tech-savvy, using ChatGPT, playing video games, being online, all those kind of things. And that person was still communicating with persons of the same age in the conflict area. And it was interesting to observe that the information that the person living in the conflict area received and were able to digest were quite different from what was being served in, for example, Norway. And it was being pushed so hard, I would say information was being weaponized in a way that this person, in the middle of their education, in the mid-20s, they were actually believing two separate instances of the truth. Obviously, there are two sides to a story, but when it comes to truths and facts, it's usually either a fact or it's false. But we have here two young people in their mid-20s that were dead certain that their version of the truth was the correct one. So how do we fix that? Because that is a problem, I think, going forward. And that will continue when information can be manipulated and weaponized and used like that. It's very dangerous. When I was a child in school, an 8-year-old boy, we were taught that the pen was mightier than the sword. And obviously I thought that was quite rubbish, because if you want to slay a dragon, a sword is a much better tool than a pen. But fast forward to today, information is very powerful. So for us as information security professionals or responsible human beings, making sure or finding some mechanism to have an assurance that the information we consume is correct or at least verifiable, that will be very important. Otherwise, the internet can become a very dark place very quickly. So availability, making sure that the services are up and running, that the information is within reach, and integrity, that it is correct. I see that this is where my priorities lie these days to a much larger extent than ensuring confidentiality, which was where I started. And I'm not the only one, because governments alike, regulatory bodies, they see the same thing. And I'm sure that if I put the microphone to either one of you, you will, as professionals, see the same thing. But we are facing a change now, also in terms of regulation. Yes, the Privacy Act, it will be discussed later today, I think, the GDPR, all those things were very important to put in place. But we see that the new regulations that are coming now, North America, in Europe, in Southeast Asia even, where we operate, Thailand, they're also going in the same direction. It's about ensuring resilience. Because we've put so many digital eggs into this one basket as a society, as a digital society, that if that bag breaks, we're in big trouble. How many of you do almost everything in your life with your phone these days? I bet most. Traveling, for example, the check-in process at the airport, passport controls, your tickets, hotel bills, everything is managed through your phone. And if you lose it, if you don't have connection to the internet, you're in trouble. You will not be able to show that you have a reservation. You will not be able to show the digital copy of your passport. And yeah, it is an issue. So that is why the governments, as well as private companies, are putting increased pressure on resilience. I mentioned to you that I was in financial services for a long time, and financial services is often one of the industries that are the earliest adopters of new regulation. And in the EU, we have, I think it's 45 sovereign states. Everyone would like to be individual and the same, but we are all interconnected, intertwined. And what the government has seen is that we need to put regulation in place that encompass the entire ecosystem of financial services industries. And that is what I call the DORA, because if one of the actors breaks, if one of the actors gets hacked, they are all interconnected, so it will take the whole financial system down. And we don't use cash anymore in Europe, we use cards or contactless and phones. And if that all of a sudden doesn't work, all kind of trouble erupts. So the DORA, I will quickly go through this. It has 5 pillars. The first is that it's a focus on management responsibility for cyber risk. All too long, IT security or information security has been left to IT people in the server rooms. Now the regulatory bodies are lifting it up to the boardrooms because, as we know, it's a tone from the top that sets the direction and ensures that things actually happen. So that will come in the Digital Operational Resilience Act. The second one is that we've seen over the years with different legislation, different directives, different acts, that they put more pressure on reporting. You have 24 hours, 72 hours, 1 week, everything must come in. And we have got this report fatigue and alert fatigue that is also difficult for the ones receiving these reports to consume. So they want to harmonize it, and they want to make sure that it's only the critical incidents that will now be reported going forward, so we reduce the level of noise. Digital operational resilience testing. That's another thing that will now be a requirement for the financial services industry. Have any of you heard about TIBER? It's an interesting acronym, but it stands for Threat Intel-Based Ethical Red Teaming. So it's pretty much a full-blown test where you would look at what adversaries you have to your business, you would look at what threats you are facing, and then you will have all the weapons in your arsenal type of practical test towards your company. That is a requirement that you do as an important financial services operator in the EU. Third parties, that is something I think we will talk more about over the years to come, because everyone is chopping up their businesses and doing a lot more partnership, interaction, cross-border, global, with third parties and with vendors. And that is also something that the regulatory bodies see, that it's not enough that you secure yourself and your company. You need to make sure that everyone else that you are dependent on in delivering your services are equally secure. And that is something I think is excellent about conferences like this, because then we get to meet consumers, vendors, suppliers, partners, and discuss these things together. The last pillar of the Resilience Act is that it now puts requirements on sharing of information. And think a little bit about that, requirements. So it's no longer, we encourage you to share information about vulnerabilities, about rising threats, about research with your peers. We require you to do so. And we require you to do so across the borders as well. So I think it's very interesting. We've been talking a lot about we need to collaborate more, we need to share more. Now it's being regulated. Now it's being required. So this is for the financial services industry. There is another one coming in Europe, Network and Information Services Directive, that is for many other industries, telecom included, and they put an emphasis on the same. Make sure that your services are available, make sure that you can recover when you have a breach, and make sure that you collaborate and share threats and share your failures so we can all learn from them. So that was all I had time for. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.